The clock on the wall showed 11 at night. Elena Vasquez was tired. Her feet hurt. Her back was sore. But she kept smiling because that was her job. She worked as a waitress at the Golden Terrace, one of the most expensive restaurants in New York City. Rich people came here to eat food that cost more than what Elena made in a week. She served them with grace and patience, even when they treated her like she was invisible. Elena was 26 years old. She had long dark hair that she always tied in a neat bun for work. Her eyes were brown and deep, holding secrets that nobody at the restaurant knew about. To the customers, she was just another waitress, just another person bringing food and clearing plates. They never looked at her long enough to see anything more. But Elena had not always been a waitress. There was a time when her life was very different. There was a time when people knew her name. There was a time when she had big dreams and an even bigger future waiting for her. When Elena was just 5 years old, her mother noticed something special about her. Little Elena would sit at the old piano in their small apartment and play songs she had heard on the radio. She had never taken a single lesson. She just listened and played. Her tiny fingers moved across the keys like they already knew where to go. Her mother cried the first time she heard Elena play a complete song. She knew her daughter had a gift. By the time Elena was 10, she was playing in local competitions and winning every single one. Teachers said she was a prodigy. They said she had talent that came once in a generation. Her father Miguel worked 2 jobs to pay for her piano lessons. Her mother Rosa gave up her own dreams so Elena could chase hers. The whole family believed that Elena would one day play on the biggest stages in the world. At 15, Elena received the news that changed everything. She had been accepted into Juilliard, the most famous music school in America. Only the best of the best got in. Elena was not just accepted, she was given a full scholarship. Her teachers said she would become one of the great pianists of her time. Her parents hugged her and cried tears of joy. It seemed like all their sacrifices had been worth it. But life has a way of destroying beautiful things. Just 2 months before Elena was supposed to start at Juilliard, her father sat the family down for a talk. Elena remembered that evening like it was yesterday. Her father could not look them in the eyes. He said he was leaving. He said he had met someone else. He said he was sorry, but he could not stay anymore. Just like that, he walked out the door and never came back. Elena's mother fell apart. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She cried every night until there were no more tears left. Then, as if the universe had not been cruel enough, Rosa started getting sick. Her hands would shake. Her legs would give out. The doctors ran tests for weeks before they finally had an answer. Rosa had multiple sclerosis. It was a disease that would slowly take away her ability to walk, to move, to live a normal life. The medical bills started piling up. Elena's younger brother Marco was only 12 years old. He could not work. Their father had disappeared and sent no money. Elena looked at the letter from Juilliard and then looked at her sick mother lying in bed. She knew what she had to do. On a cold September morning, Elena called Juilliard and told them she would not be coming. The woman on the phone tried to convince her to reconsider. She said Elena was throwing away a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but Elena had made up her mind. Her family needed her more than she needed her dreams. She got a job at a small diner the very next week. The pay was bad, but it was something. She worked 12-hour shifts and came home to take care of her mother. She helped Marco with his homework and made sure he stayed in school. She became the parent that her father should have been. Years passed. Elena moved from the small diner to better restaurants. She learned how to serve rich people with a smile. She learned how to stay calm when they were rude. She learned how to be invisible. Eventually, she got a job at the Golden Terrace. The tips were good, and she needed every dollar she could get. Her mother's condition got worse over the years. Rosa now spent most of her time in a wheelchair. She needed special medicine that cost thousands of dollars every month. Elena worked double shifts whenever she could. Some nights she slept only 3 or 4 hours before coming back to work. Marco was 19 now. He was smart enough to go to any college he wanted, but there was no money for college. So he worked at a gas station during the day and took online classes at night. He never complained. He had learned from his sister that sometimes life does not give you what you deserve. The Golden Terrace was a beautiful restaurant. It had tall windows and soft lighting. It had white tablecloths and crystal glasses. And in the corner, it had a grand piano, a Steinway, the most beautiful piano Elena had ever seen. Every night Elena walked past that piano dozens of times. She would look at it and feel a pain in her chest. It was like seeing an old friend who no longer recognized her. Sometimes, when the restaurant was empty before opening, she would stand near the piano and just stare at the keys. She never touched them. She was afraid that if she did, all the feelings she had buried would come rushing back. The piano was just for decoration. Nobody ever played it. It sat there, silent and beautiful, like a broken promise. The owner of the restaurant thought it made the place look fancy. He had no idea that his waitress could play it better than most professional musicians. Elena never told anyone about her past. She never mentioned Juilliard or her competitions or her dreams. What was the point? That life was over. That girl was gone. Now she was just Elena the waitress. Elena who brought bread and poured wine. Elena who smiled and said thank you when people left tips. Elena who went home to a sick mother and a mountain of bills. Some nights, when she was alone in her small apartment, Elena would close her eyes and move her fingers in the air. She would play invisible keys and hear music that existed only in her memory. She would remember how it felt to sit on a stage with a spotlight on her face and an audience holding their breath. She would remember the sound of applause and the feeling of being special. Then she would open her eyes and see her reality, a tired woman in a small room, dreaming of a life she would never have. But Elena did not know that her life was about to change. She did not know that fate had a plan for her. She did not know that sometimes the universe takes away your dreams only to give them back when you least expect it. That night, as Elena put on her work uniform and prepared for another long shift, she had no idea that she would never be invisible again. The black limousine stopped in front of the Golden Terrace at exactly 9 o'clock. It was longer than any car on the street. The driver stepped out quickly and opened the back door. A man emerged from the car like a king stepping out of his castle. His name was Richard Harrington III, because his father was rich, and his grandfather was rich before that. But Richard was richer than both of them combined. He was a billionaire. He owned buildings all over New York. He owned hotels in Paris and London. He owned so much that he sometimes forgot what he owned. Richard was 52 years old. He had gray hair that was always perfectly styled. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's cars. His watch alone was worth $300,000. He walked with his chin up and his chest out, like the whole world existed just for him. Behind him came 6 other people. They were investors, business partners, and people who laughed at all his jokes. Richard liked to surround himself with such people. They made him feel important. They made him feel powerful. They agreed with everything he said and never told him he was wrong. Tonight was a special night for Richard. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career. He had bought 15 buildings in Manhattan for $800 million. By next year, those buildings would be worth double that amount. He was going to make more money than he could ever spend, and he wanted to celebrate. The manager of the Golden Terrace saw Richard coming and nearly had a heart attack. Richard Harrington was the kind of customer every restaurant wanted but also feared. He spent money like water. He ordered the most expensive wines, but he was also the hardest man to please. If anything went wrong, he would destroy the restaurant's reputation with one phone call. The manager rushed to greet Richard at the door. He bowed his head slightly and smiled his biggest smile. He called Richard by name and said it was an honor to have him. Richard barely looked at him. He simply said he wanted the best table, the best champagne, and the best service. Or else. The manager nodded quickly and led Richard to the biggest table in the restaurant. It was in the center of the room where everyone could see him. That was exactly what Richard wanted. He wanted people to look at him. He wanted them to know that someone important was in the room. That's Richard sat down. He looked around the restaurant with cold eyes. He noticed the other customers glancing at him. Some recognized him from magazines and newspapers. He was famous, after all. Not for good reasons, but famous still. People whispered his name. They took secret pictures with their phones. Richard pretended not to notice, but inside, he loved every second of it. The investors sat around him and immediately started praising him. They told him he was a genius. They told him this deal would go down in history. They told him he was the greatest businessman of his generation. Richard smiled and nodded. He believed every word because he believed he was better than everyone else. Richard Harrington had not always been this way. There was a time, long ago, when he was a normal boy with normal dreams. He grew up in a wealthy family, yes, but his parents taught him to be humble. His mother used to say that money means nothing if you have no kindness in your heart. But Richard forgot those lessons a long time ago. When Richard was 25, his father gave him control of the family business. It was a test. His father wanted to see if Richard could handle the pressure. But instead of being grateful, Richard became hungry. He wanted more, always more. He pushed out his father's old partners. He fired anyone who disagreed with him. He made deals that hurt people but made him richer. Over the years, Richard became known for 2 things. First, he was known for making money. Nobody could deny that he was good at business. He could see opportunities that others missed. He could turn small investments into huge fortunes. Second, he was known for being cruel. He treated people like they were nothing. He yelled at employees until they cried. He humiliated anyone he thought was beneath him. And to Richard, almost everyone was beneath him. His wife had left him 10 years ago. She said she could not live with a man who had no heart. His 2 children barely talked to him. They visited once a year, on his birthday, and left as soon as they could. Richard told himself he did not care. He told himself that money was more important than family. He told himself he was happy. But late at night, when he was alone in his giant mansion, Richard sometimes felt a strange emptiness. He had everything a man could want, but he had no one to share it with. He had no real friends. He had no one who loved him for who he was. Everyone around him only cared about his money. Richard never thought about this for too long. It made him uncomfortable. So he filled his life with deals and parties and expensive things. He stayed busy so he would not have to think about how lonely he really was. Tonight, sitting in the Golden Terrace, Richard was in a particularly bad mood despite his big success. The traffic had been terrible on the way here. His assistant had made a mistake in his schedule. And worst of all, He had seen a news article calling him one of the most hated billionaires in America. The article made him angry. He did not understand why people did not like him. He gave money to charity. He created jobs. Why could they not see how great he was? The manager came to the table personally to take the drink order. Richard demanded 3 bottles of their most expensive champagne. It cost $5,000 per bottle. The manager said, of course, and hurried away. Then Richard looked around for his waitress. He wanted to order food immediately. He was not the kind of man who liked to wait. Waiting was for ordinary people. He was Richard Harrington III. The world moved at his speed, not the other way around. He saw a young woman in a waitress uniform walking toward his table. She had dark hair and tired eyes. She carried a tray with bread and water. She looked like every other waitress Richard had ever seen. Invisible, unimportant, just another worker who existed to serve him. Richard did not know that this woman was about to change his life. He did not know that beneath her simple uniform was a talent that would shake him to his core. He did not know that by the end of tonight, everything he believed about himself would be questioned. All he knew was that his waitress was approaching, and he was ready to show her who was in charge. Alina reached the table and took a deep breath. She had served rich customers before. She had survived rude people before. She told herself this would be no different. She had no idea how wrong she was. Alina walked to the table with a professional smile on her face. She had learned to smile even when she did not feel like it. A good smile meant good tips. Good tips meant her mother could get her medicine. It was that simple. She placed the basket of bread on the table and began pouring water into the crystal glasses. Her hands were steady. Her movements were graceful. She had done this 1,000 times before. Richard did not even look at her as she poured. He was busy talking to the man next to him about his latest deal. He spoke loudly so that everyone in the restaurant could hear how important he was. He used big numbers and complicated words. He wanted people to be impressed. Alina finished pouring the water and stood back. She waited politely for him to notice her. She waited for him to give her his attention so she could take his order. But Richard kept talking. 1 minute passed, then 2. Alina stood there like a statue, her feet starting to ache. Finally, Richard turned and looked at her. His eyes moved up and down, judging her. She saw no warmth in his gaze, no kindness, only cold evaluation. Like she was a piece of furniture he was deciding whether to keep. He picked up his glass of water and took a small sip. Then he made a face like he had tasted poison. "That water is too cold," he said. His voice was sharp. "It hurts my teeth. Are you trying to give me problems?" Alina felt her heart drop, but she kept her smile. She apologized politely and said she would bring room temperature water right away. Richard waved his hand like he was shooing away a fly. She hurried to the kitchen and got new water. When she came back, Richard took another sip and shook his head again. "Now it is not cold enough," he said. "Can you not do anything right?" The people at his table laughed nervously. They always laughed when Richard complained about service. It was safer to laugh with him than to say nothing. Alina apologized again and asked what temperature he would prefer. Richard looked at her like she had asked the stupidest question in the world. "I should not have to tell you," he said. "You should know. That is your job. What do they pay you for?" Alina bit her tongue. She wanted to say something back. She wanted to tell him that water was just water. But she needed this job. Her mother needed this job. So she said nothing and went to get different water. When she returned, Richard had moved on to the bread. He picked up a piece and pressed it with his finger. Then he dropped it back in the basket with a look of disgust. "This bread is too warm," he announced loudly. "It is practically sweating. Do you serve your customers soggy bread? What kind of restaurant is this?" Alina explained that the bread had just come from the oven. Fresh bread was supposed to be warm, but Richard did not want to hear it. "I know what fresh bread is," he snapped. "I have eaten in the finest restaurants in the world, Paris, Rome, Tokyo, and none of them served me warm wet bread. Take it back and bring proper bread." Alina took the basket and walked back to the kitchen. The other servers looked at her with pity. They knew who Richard Harrington was. They knew his reputation. One of them whispered to her to stay strong. Alina nodded and took a deep breath. She brought back new bread that had been sitting out for a while. It was room temperature now. Richard took a piece, bit into it, and made another face. "Now it is too dry," he said. "This is like eating paper. Is there no one in this kitchen who knows how to make bread?" Alina stood there, her hands folded in front of her. She did not know what to say. The bread had been perfect. The water had been fine. Nothing she did would be good enough for this man. He did not want good service. He wanted someone to bully. Richard pointed at her with his finger. "What is your name?" he demanded. "Alina," she replied quietly. "Well, Alina," he said her name like it was a joke. "You are the worst waitress I have ever had, and I have had waitresses in 50 countries. Do you know that? 50 countries, and you are the worst." His table laughed again. One of the men slapped the table with his hand. Another one raised his glass like Richard had just told the funniest joke in the world. Alina felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. But she stayed still. She stayed quiet. She had survived worse than this. The night continued, and so did Richard's complaints. The menu was printed in a font he did not like. The lighting was too dim over his table. The music in the background was too loud. Every few minutes he found something new to criticize, and every time he made sure Lena felt like it was her fault. Then came the wine. Richard had ordered a bottle of red wine that cost $800. Alina carried it carefully to the table. She had been trained to pour wine correctly. She knew exactly how to hold the bottle, how to twist at the end so no drops would spill. She began pouring into Richard's glass. Everything was going perfectly. Then, one of the men at the table suddenly moved his arm to gesture while telling a story. His elbow bumped Elena's hand. Just a small bump, but it was enough. A tiny drop of wine splashed onto the tablecloth. Just one drop. It was barely visible against the white fabric. But Richard saw it. He stood up so fast that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. The whole restaurant went silent. Everyone turned to look. "You stupid girl," Richard shouted. His face was red with anger. "Look what you have done. This suit costs $15,000. $15,000? Do you know how many years you would have to work to pay for this?" Alina looked at his sleeve. There was no wine on it. Not a single drop. The wine had only touched the tablecloth. But she knew better than to argue. "I am so sorry, sir," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, let you what?" Richard interrupted. "Let you ruin more of my clothes. Let you destroy my evening." He turned to the manager, who had rushed over in panic. "I want her to pay for the dry cleaning of this suit, right now. Take it from her paycheck." The manager looked at Alina with apologetic eyes, but he was more afraid of Richard than he was sorry for her. He nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Harrington," the manager said. $200 will be taken from her pay tonight." Alina felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. $200. That was almost half of what she made tonight. That was her mother's medicine. That was food for the week, but she did not cry. She did not scream. She simply nodded and said she understood. Richard sat back down with a satisfied smile. He had won. He had shown everyone who had the power. He picked up his wine glass and took a long sip. Alina walked away from the table slowly. Her legs felt weak. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She went to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. She looked at herself for a long moment. She saw a tired woman with sad eyes. She saw someone who had given up everything for her family. She saw someone who deserved so much better than this. One day, she whispered to her reflection, one day, things will be different. Then she wiped her eyes, fixed her hair, and walked back out to continue serving the man who had just humiliated her in front of everyone, because that was her life now, and she had no choice but to live it. The hours passed slowly. Alina continued to serve Richard and his guests like nothing had happened. She brought their food. She refilled their drinks. She smiled and nodded and said, "Yes, sir," whenever Richard demanded something. But inside, she was breaking. Every time she walked past his table, she felt his eyes on her. He was watching her like a cat watches a mouse. He was waiting for her to make another mistake. He wanted another chance to humiliate her. Richard was on his third bottle of champagne now. His face was red. His voice was louder than before. He was telling stories about his life, about all the famous people he knew, about all the important things he had done. His guests listened and nodded and laughed at all the right moments. They were very good at pretending to be impressed. Alina was clearing plates from a nearby table when she heard Richard's voice rise above the noise of the restaurant. "You know," he was saying, "I am not just a businessman. I am a patron of the arts. Do you know what that means?" His guests shook their heads, even though they probably knew. "It means I support culture," Richard continued. "I have donated millions of dollars to concert halls and museums. I have paid for young artists to study in Europe. I appreciate the finer things in life. Not like common people who think art is something you hang on a refrigerator." Everyone at the table laughed. Richard smiled, pleased with himself. Then his eyes landed on something in the corner of the restaurant. The grand piano. It sat there silent and beautiful, its black surface shining under the soft lights. Richard stared at it for a long moment. Then a strange smile spread across his face. Alina felt a chill run down her spine. She did not know why, but something told her that something bad was about to happen. Richard pointed at the piano. "That is a Steinway," he announced. "One of the finest pianos in the world. I have 3 of them in my houses. My late mother used to play. She was quite good." One of his guests said something about how wonderful that must have been. Richard nodded proudly. Then, without warning, Richard turned his head and looked directly at Alina. She froze with a stack of dirty plates in her hands. He called out, "Waitress, come here." Alina felt every eye in the restaurant turn to her. Her heart began to beat faster. She set down the plates and walked slowly to his table. She kept her face calm, but her hands were trembling slightly. "Yes, sir?" she asked. Richard leaned back in his chair and looked at her with an amused expression. "Tell me, Alina," he said her name like it was something dirty. "Can you play piano?" The question hit Alina like a punch to the chest. She stood there, unable to speak. The piano. Of all the things he could ask about, he chose the piano. The one thing in this restaurant that she tried not to look at. The one thing that reminded her of everything she had lost. She did not answer. She could not answer. Richard laughed. "I thought so," he said. "Of course you cannot play. People like you do not have culture. You probably think Beethoven is a dog from that movie. What was it called? The one with the big dog." His guests laughed loudly. Some of them clapped their hands. They thought this was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Alina felt something stir inside her, something she had not felt in a long time. It was anger. Real, hot anger that started in her chest and spread through her whole body. She thought about her mother, who had sacrificed everything so Alina could learn piano. She thought about her father, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for her lessons. She thought about all the years she had practiced, all the competitions she had won, all the dreams she had given up. And now this man, this arrogant, cruel man, was laughing at her. He was telling her she had no culture. He was saying she was nothing. Something in Alina snapped actually. She said quietly, "I do play." The laughter at the table stopped. Richard raised his eyebrows. He looked genuinely surprised. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said I do play," Alina repeated. Her voice was stronger now. "I play piano." For a moment, Richard just stared at her. Then his face broke into a wide smile. But it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had just found its prey. He stood up from his chair and raised his voice so the whole restaurant could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "our waitress here claims she can play piano." He turned to look at Alina with mocking eyes. Well, this I have to see. Richard, one of his guests said nervously. "Maybe we should just No, Richard interrupted. "I want to see this. I am a patron of the arts, remember? I love discovering new talent." He looked at Alina with a cruel smile. "So here's what we are going to do. You are going to walk over to that piano, and you are going to play something. If you can actually play, I will give you a $10,000 tip. Right here, right now." Alina felt her breath catch in her throat. $10,000. That was more money than she made in 3 months. That was her mother's medicine for an entire year. That was Marco's college fund. But then Richard's smile grew even wider. "However," he continued, "if you cannot play, if you sit down and embarrass yourself, then you are fired immediately, and I will make sure every restaurant in New York knows that you are a liar who wastes customers' time." The restaurant was completely silent now. Everyone was watching. The other customers, the servers, the kitchen staff who had come out to see what was happening. All eyes were on Alina. The manager stepped forward with a panicked expression. "Mr. Harrington, please," he said. "She is one of our best servers. Maybe we could." Richard held up his hand. "Not your decision," he said coldly. He looked back at Alina. "It is her decision. So what will it be, waitress? Are you going to prove you are more than just a girl who carries plates? Or are you going to admit you lied and go back to doing the only thing you are good for?" Alina stood there, her mind racing. She had not touched a piano in over 3 years. Her fingers had not felt keys in so long. What if she could not do it anymore? What if she sat down and her hands did not remember how to play? She looked at the piano across the room. It was so far away. And yet, it was calling to her. It had always been calling to her. Every night she worked here, she had just been too afraid to answer. She thought about her mother lying in the hospital bed. She thought about Marco working at the gas station instead of going to college. She thought about the $200 Richard had just stolen from her paycheck, and she thought about the little girl she used to be. The girl who played piano like it was the easiest thing in the world. The girl who had been called a prodigy. The girl who had been accepted to Juilliard. That girl was still inside her somewhere. Alina could feel it. She looked Richard directly in the eyes. For the first time all night, she did not look away. She did not bow her head. She did not say yes, sir. Instead, she simply said one word. Okay. Then she took off her apron, set it on the nearest table, and began walking toward the piano. Richard's smile faltered for just a second. He had expected her to back down. He had expected her to cry and apologize and admit she was lying. He had not expected her to actually do it. He quickly recovered and pulled out his phone. He started recording a video. He was already thinking about how many views this would get. The humiliation of a waitress who thought she could play piano. His followers would love it. Alina did not see the phone. She did not see the staring faces. She did not see anything except the piano growing closer with every step. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were shaking. But she kept walking because sometimes you have to risk everything to remember who you really are. The distance from Richard's table to the piano was only about 30 feet. But to Alina it felt like a mile. Every step seemed to take forever. Every breath felt heavy in her chest. The whole restaurant was silent, watching her walk toward her fate. Alina could feel the eyes on her back. She could feel Richard's phone pointed at her, recording every second. She could feel the doubt creeping into her mind like cold water. What was she doing? What had she agreed to? This was madness. Her feet moved across the polished floor, one step, then another. She passed tables of wealthy customers who looked at her with curious eyes. Some of them seemed sympathetic. Others seemed excited, like they were about to watch a car crash. Nobody looked away. Alina's mind was spinning. She had not played piano in over 3 years. The last time she had touched keys was in her tiny apartment, on a cheap electronic keyboard she had bought from a thrift store. She had tried to practice one night after work, but when she pressed the keys, she had started crying so hard that she could not continue. The music reminded her of everything she had lost, so she had put the keyboard in the closet and never touched it again. Now she was about to sit down at a grand Steinway piano in front of dozens of people. And not just any people. Rich, educated people who had probably been to hundreds of concerts. People who would know immediately if she was a fraud. And Richard with his phone. Richard with his cruel smile. Richard who would destroy her if she failed. Elena's hands were shaking so badly now that she had to press them against her sides to stop them. She could feel sweat forming on her forehead. Her mouth was dry. Her legs felt weak. She thought about turning around. She thought about going back to Richard's table, admitting she had lied, and accepting whatever punishment he gave her. At least then, she would still have her job. At least then she could still pay for her mother's medicine. But then she remembered the way he had looked at her all night. The way he had treated her like she was nothing. The way he had said people, like you do not have culture now. No, she would not give him the satisfaction of watching her run away. Elena kept walking. The manager was standing near the kitchen door, his face pale with worry. He had no idea that his waitress could play piano. He thought she was about to humiliate herself and ruin the restaurant's reputation. He wanted to stop her, but he was too afraid of Richard to say anything. The other servers watched from the corners of the room. Some of them had worked with Elena for years. They knew she was kind and hardworking. They knew she never complained about anything. But they had no idea about her past. They had no idea about Juilliard or the competitions, or the girl who had once been called a prodigy. One of the servers, a young woman named Maria, crossed her fingers behind her back. "Please," she whispered. "Please let her be okay." Elena reached the piano. She stood in front of it for a moment, looking down at the black and white keys. They were beautiful, perfect, waiting for her. The Steinway was an instrument worth over $200,000. It was one of the finest pianos in the world. Elena had dreamed of playing on a piano like this when she was a child. She had imagined performing on stages all over the world, sitting in front of Steinways and filling concert halls with music. Now here she was, not on a stage, not in a concert hall, just a tired waitress in a restaurant about to fight for her dignity, in front of a man who thought she was worthless. Elena pulled out the piano bench and sat down slowly. The seat was smooth and comfortable. She adjusted her position, moving forward slightly until she was at the perfect distance from the keys. Her body remembered these movements even after all these years. She placed her hands in her lap and closed her eyes. She tried to block out the sounds around her, the whispers of the customers, the clicking of Richard's phone, the pounding of her own heart. She thought about her mother, her beautiful, strong mother who had believed in her from the very first day. She remembered sitting on her mother's lap as a little girl, pressing the keys of their old piano while her mother sang softly in Spanish. Those were the happiest memories of Elena's life. She thought about her father. Before he left, he had been her biggest supporter. He had driven her to every competition. He had sat in the front row at every recital. He had told her again and again that she was special, that she was going to be somebody. She thought about Juilliard, the letter of acceptance that she still kept in a drawer at home, the dream that had been taken from her before she could even begin. And she thought about Marco, her little brother who deserved a better life, who deserved to go to college and become something great. If she won this challenge, if she got that $10,000, she could finally help him. Elena opened her eyes. The fear was still there, but now there was something else too. Determination, strength, fire. She raised her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The touch was familiar, like greeting an old friend. The keys were cool and smooth under her fingertips. They felt like home. She took one deep breath. Then another. Richard stood in the back of the restaurant, his phone raised high. His smile had grown even wider. He was already imagining how this video would go viral. The waitress who thought she could play piano, the embarrassment, the failure. His followers would love it. The investors at his table were whispering to each other. They felt uncomfortable. This felt wrong. But none of them had the courage to tell Richard to stop. Nobody ever told Richard to stop. The other customers held their breath. They did not know what was about to happen. They did not know if this was going to be wonderful or terrible. But they could not look away. An elderly woman at a table near the window clasped her hands together. There was something in the young waitress's eyes that gave her hope, something that reminded her of her own youth, when she had been told she could never amount to anything. She silently prayed for the girl. Elena looked at the keys. If she thought about what to play, there were many pieces she knew by heart, simple pieces that would be safe and easy, songs that everyone knew. But no, if she was going to do this, she was going to do it right. She was going to show Richard Harrington and everyone in this restaurant exactly who she was. She chose Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the entire piano repertoire. Professional pianists spent months preparing this piece for performances. It required incredible technique, deep emotion, and complete control. It was the last piece she had performed before giving up her dream. It was the piece she had played at her final competition at Juilliard's entrance audition. It was the piece that had won her a full scholarship. Elena closed her eyes one more time. She said a silent prayer. She thought of everyone who had ever believed in her. Then she opened her eyes, looked at the keys, and began to play. The first notes floated into the air, soft, haunting, beautiful, and in that moment, everything changed. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. One filled the restaurant like a gentle wave. They were soft and delicate, floating through the air like whispers from another world. Elena's fingers moved across the keys with a tenderness that surprised even her. For a moment, nobody in the restaurant moved. Nobody breathed. The sounds coming from the piano were so unexpected, so beautiful, that everyone froze in place. Richard's smirk began to fade. His phone was still recording, but his hand had stopped moving. He had expected to hear clumsy, awkward sounds. He had expected wrong notes and embarrassing pauses. He had expected to capture the humiliation of a waitress who did not know her place. Instead, he was hearing something that did not make sense. This was not the playing of an amateur. This was not someone who had taken a few lessons as a child. This was something else entirely. The opening melody of the ballad floated through the room, sad and haunting. It told a story of longing and loss. It spoke of dreams that had been broken and hearts that had been wounded. Every person in the restaurant felt something stir inside them. Even if they did not understand why, Alina kept her eyes closed as she played. She did not want to see the faces watching her. She did not want to think about Richard or his phone or the challenge she had accepted. She only wanted to feel the music. And she did feel it. For the first time in 3 years, she felt the music flowing through her like water through a river. Her fingers remembered everything. Every note, every phrase, every tiny detail of this piece she had practiced 1,000 times. The ballad grew more intense. The soft opening gave way to stronger chords and faster passages. Elena's hands moved with incredible speed and precision. She hit every note perfectly. Not a single mistake. Not a single hesitation. One of the investors at Richard's table leaned over to another and whispered something. His eyes were wide with disbelief. The other man nodded slowly, equally shocked. They both recognized what they were hearing. This was professional level playing. This was the kind of performance you paid hundreds of dollars to see at Carnegie Hall. The elderly woman near the window had tears forming in her eyes. The music reminded her of her late husband. He had loved classical music. He used to take her to concerts every month before he passed away. Now, listening to this young waitress play, she felt like he was sitting right beside her again. The manager of the restaurant stood with his mouth hanging open. He had worked at the Golden Terrace for 15 years. He had seen many things, but he had never seen anything like this. His waitress, the quiet girl who never complained about anything, was playing piano like a master. Richard's face had changed completely. The cruel smile was gone. The mocking expression had disappeared. In its place was something new, something he had not felt in a very long time. It was confusion. It was disbelief. And somewhere deep inside, it was the beginning of shame. He lowered his phone slightly. He was still recording, but he had forgotten why. He could not look away from Alina. He could not understand how this was possible. How could a waitress play like this? It did not fit into his view of the world. In Richard's world, poor people were poor because they had no talent. Waitresses were waitresses because they could not do anything else. That was what he had always believed. But the music coming from that piano was destroying everything he thought. He knew Alina reached the most emotional part of the ballad. The melody soared high, then fell low. It cried out in pain, then whispered in hope. Her whole body moved with the music. She leaned forward during the intense passages and pulled back during the gentle ones. She was not just playing the piano. She was speaking through it. All the pain she had held inside for years was pouring out through her fingers. The pain of giving up Juilliard. The pain of watching her mother get sicker every day. The pain of working endless hours while her dreams gathered dust. The pain of being treated like nothing by men like Richard Harrington. She poured it all into the music, and the music transformed it into something beautiful. A woman at one of the tables started crying silently. She did not know why. She did not even like classical music usually. But something about this performance was reaching into her chest and squeezing her heart. Her husband put his arm around her. He did not ask why she was crying. He understood. Some things were too beautiful for words. Some things could only be felt. The other servers had gathered near the kitchen door. They watched their colleague with amazement. Maria, the young server who had crossed her fingers earlier, was crying too. She had always liked Elena, but she never knew. She never imagined. The kitchen staff had come out to watch. The head chef, a large man who never showed emotion, was standing perfectly still with tears running down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. He did not seem embarrassed. He just stood there, letting the music wash over him. Richard's guests had stopped whispering. They sat in complete silence, their champagne glasses forgotten. One of them, a man who had spent his whole life thinking only about money, felt something crack inside his chest. He could not remember the last time he had felt moved by anything. He had thought that part of him was dead, but this music was bringing it back to life. Alina did not see any of this. Her eyes were still closed. She was lost in the music, lost in the memories, lost in the girl she used to be. For these few minutes, she was not a waitress. She was not tired or poor or invisible. She was Alina Vasquez, the piano prodigy. She was the girl who had been accepted to Juilliard. She was the girl who had been told she would be one of the greats. The ballad built toward its climax. The music grew louder and more powerful. Elena's fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed. The notes cascaded like a waterfall, filling every corner of the restaurant with sound. And then, just when it seemed like the music could not get any more intense, it began to soften. The storm passed. The passion faded into peace. The melody returned, gentle and sad, like the end of a beautiful dream. Alina played the final notes with her eyes still closed. The last chord hung in the air for a long moment. Then there was silence. Complete, perfect silence. Alina opened her eyes. Her hands were still resting on the keys. Her heart was pounding. Her cheeks were wet with tears. She did not remember crying. She had done it. After 3 years of silence, she had played again, and it had been the most beautiful performance of her life. The silence lasted for what felt like forever. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The restaurant was frozen in time, like a photograph of people who had just witnessed something they could not explain. Then Alina did something unexpected. She did not stand up. She did not turn to face Richard and claim her victory. Instead, she took a breath and placed her hands on the keys again. She was not done. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 began to fill the room. This was one of the most famous and most difficult pieces ever written for piano. Professional pianists spent years mastering this concerto. It required not just technical skill but deep emotional understanding. Alina played the solo arrangement from memory. Every note was perfect. Every phrase was shaped with care. Her hands stretched across the wide chords with ease, reaching notes that seemed impossible to reach. If the Chopin had been beautiful, the Rachmaninoff was breathtaking. The music swelled and crashed like waves against rocks. It whispered like lovers in the night. It cried out in triumph and wept in sorrow. It was everything human emotion could be, translated into sound. Richard had completely forgotten about his phone. It hung loosely in his hand, still recording but pointed at the floor. He was staring at Alina with an expression nobody had ever seen on his face before. His eyes were wide. His mouth was slightly open. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The investors at his table were equally stunned. These were men who owned private jets and vacation homes in 5 countries. They had seen and done everything. Nothing impressed them anymore. But this young woman in a waitress uniform was making them feel like children again, experiencing wonder for the first time. One of them, a man named Robert who had made his fortune in technology, found himself thinking about his daughter. She was 18 and wanted to be a musician. He had told her it was a waste of time. He had told her to study business like him. Now watching Alina play, he wondered if he had been wrong. He wondered if he had been crushing his daughter's dreams, the same way life had tried to crush Alina's. The elderly woman near the window was sobbing openly now. Her name was Margaret, and she was 82 years old. Her husband had died 5 years ago, and she had not cried since his funeral. She had thought she had no tears left, but this music had unlocked something inside her. All the grief she had buried was finally coming out. The woman at the next table reached over and took Margaret's hand. They were strangers, but in this moment, they were connected. The music had made them sisters. Throughout the restaurant, similar scenes were unfolding. People who had never met were looking at each other with understanding. Couples were holding hands. Friends were leaning on each other's shoulders. The music had stripped away all the walls people build around their hearts. For these few minutes, everyone in the Golden Terrace was completely honest and completely vulnerable. Alina transitioned into the most famous melody of the concerto. It was the part that everyone recognized, even people who knew nothing about classical music. The melody was so beautiful, so perfectly constructed that it seemed impossible a human being could have created it, and Alina played it like she was the one who had written it. She played it like these notes were her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own soul made audible. The head chef had to sit down. His legs could not hold him anymore. He leaned against the wall and let the tears flow freely. He was a tough man who had worked in kitchens for 30 years. He had seen everything, but he had never heard anything like this. Maria, the young server, was holding onto another server's arm so tightly that she was leaving marks. She did not notice. She could not take her eyes off Alina. She kept whispering the same words over and over. I had no idea. I had no idea. The manager had given up trying to maintain his professional composure. He was crying like a baby, not caring who saw. In that moment he was not thinking about the restaurant or Richard Harrington or his job. He was thinking about his mother, who had died when he was young. She used to sing to him every night before bed. He had not thought about that in decades. Richard stood alone at the back of the restaurant. His guests had moved away from him without realizing it, drawn closer to the piano by the music. He was isolated now, surrounded by people but completely alone. He watched Alina play, and something strange was happening inside him. Memories he had buried long ago were surfacing. He remembered his mother sitting at their family piano when he was a boy. She had tried to teach him to play, but he had been too impatient. He had wanted to go outside and play with his friends. Now he would give anything to go back to those moments. He remembered his wife. On the day she left him, she had said something that he had dismissed at the time. She had said, "Richard, you have forgotten how to feel. You have forgotten how to be human." He had laughed at her. He had told her she was being dramatic. But standing here now, watching a waitress pour her soul into a piano, he understood what she had meant. He had spent so many years chasing money that he had lost himself. He had become a machine. A cruel, empty machine that knew how to make deals but had forgotten how to be alive. Alina reached the climax of the rock montage. The music thundered through the restaurant, powerful and overwhelming. Her fingers moved so fast they were almost a blur. The piano seemed to shake with the force of her playing. It was like watching a storm inside a wooden box. Then, slowly, the storm began to calm. The music softened. The melody returned, peaceful now, like sunshine after rain. Alina played the final passages with her eyes closed, her face peaceful, her body swaying gently with the rhythm. The last note faded into silence. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. The restaurant was like a church at the end of a prayer. Then, as if someone had given a signal, everyone began to clap at the same time. It started slowly, a few hands coming together, then more, and more. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was filled with the sound of applause. People were standing up from their tables. They were cheering. They were calling out words like bravo and magnificent. It was the kind of standing ovation that professional pianists dream about, the kind of response that fills concert halls after legendary performances. And it was happening in a restaurant. For a waitress who had not played piano in 3 years, Alina finally opened her eyes. She looked around the room in shock. She saw the tears on people's faces. She heard the applause washing over her like waves. She felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt seen, not as a waitress, not as someone's servant, not as a poor girl who had given up her dreams. She felt seen as Elena Vasquez, the pianist, the prodigy, the girl who had music in her soul. And in that moment she knew that whatever happened next, she had already won. The applause continued for a long time. People did not want to stop. They did not want the moment to end. Some of them had already taken out their phones to record, but most just stood there clapping until their hands hurt. Alina sat at the piano, overwhelmed. She did not know what to do. She had not expected this. She had not expected anything except maybe surviving the challenge without losing her job. But this reaction was something else entirely. These people were looking at her like she had given them a gift. Slowly, she stood up from the piano bench. Her legs were shaking. Her whole body felt weak, like she had just run a marathon. Playing with that much emotion had drained everything out of her. She turned to face the restaurant. The applause grew even louder. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes while they clapped. Others were smiling at her with pure joy on their faces. Then Alina saw Richard. He was walking toward her through the crowd. People moved aside to let him pass. The applause began to quiet down as everyone watched to see what would happen next. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. The cruel billionaire who had challenged the waitress. What would he do now? Richard's face was impossible to read. His expression was not angry, but it was not happy either. It was something else, something complicated. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a very long sleep and did not recognize the world around him. He stopped a few feet away from Alina. They stood there facing each other. The waitress and the billionaire, the nobody and the somebody. The whole restaurant held its breath. Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He closed it again. He looked down at the floor for a moment, then back up at Alina. Where did you learn to play like that? He finally asked. His voice was quiet. It was the first time all night that he had spoken without shouting or mocking. Alina looked at him directly. She was not afraid anymore. That music had taken away her fear. It had reminded her of who she really was. Juilliard, she said simply, before life happened. Richard's eyes widened. Juilliard, he repeated. The music school. Alina nodded. I was accepted when I was 15. Full scholarship. But my father left us and my mother got sick. Someone had to take care of my family. Someone had to work. She said it without self-pity. She was not looking for sympathy. She was just stating facts. This was her life. This was what had happened. There was no point in being sad about it now. Richard stood very still. He seemed to be processing what she had said. The investors had gathered behind him, listening to every word. The rest of the restaurant was silent, everyone straining to hear. You gave up Juilliard, Richard said slowly, to become a waitress. I gave up Juilliard to save my family, Alina corrected him. Being a waitress is just how I did it. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room, including himself. He apologized. I am sorry, he said. The words seemed to cause him physical pain, like he had never said them before in his life, which, in many ways, he had not. Alina blinked in surprise. She had expected many things from this man. More insults, excuses, maybe even anger that she had proven him wrong. But an apology was not on her list, Richard continued, his voice growing stronger but still humble. I treated you terribly tonight. I treated you like you were beneath me. I made fun of you in front of everyone. I took money from your paycheck. He paused and shook his head. I was wrong. I was so wrong. The investors exchanged glances. They had known Richard Harrington for years. Some of them had known him for decades. None of them had ever heard him apologize to anyone. Richard Harrington did not apologize. Richard Harrington did not admit he was wrong. It simply did not happen. But it was happening now. Richard looked around the restaurant at all the faces watching him. Then he raised his voice so everyone could hear. I want everyone here to know something, he announced. Tonight, I acted like a fool. I looked at this young woman and I saw a waitress. I saw someone to look down on, someone to make fun of. He turned back to Alina. But I was blind. I was judging her by her job, by her uniform, by how much money she makes. And that is the stupidest thing a person can do. He took a step closer to Alina. She could see that his eyes were wet. Richard Harrington, the man who never showed emotion, had tears in his eyes. I have spent my whole life measuring people's worth by their bank accounts, he continued. I thought money was everything. I thought being rich made me better than everyone else. He shook his head again. But tonight, you showed me how wrong I have been. You have more talent in one finger than I have in my entire body. You have more dignity, more grace, more courage than I have ever had. Alina did not know what to say. This was not the same man who had tormented her all evening. This was someone else. Someone broken open by music. Someone finally seeing the truth. Why did you challenge me? She asked softly. Why did you want to humiliate me? Richard thought about the question for a long moment. Then he gave the most honest answer he had ever given in his life. Because I am unhappy, he said. Because my wife left me. Because my children do not speak to me. Because I have all the money in the world and no one who loves me. He looked at Alina with sad eyes. I think I wanted to hurt someone else because I hurt so much inside. That is not an excuse. It is just the truth. The restaurant was completely silent. People were witnessing something rare. A powerful man admitting his weakness. A bully confessing his pain. It was uncomfortable and beautiful at the same time. Alina looked at Richard for a long moment. She thought about all the terrible things he had said to her. She thought about the $200 he had stolen from her paycheck. She thought about how close she had come to giving up. But she also thought about something her mother had told her long ago. Hurting people hurt others, her mother had said. The cruelest people are often the ones in the most pain. Alina took a deep breath. Then she did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She forgave him. I accept your apology, she said. We all make mistakes. We all have pain. What matters is what we do next. Richard stared at her in disbelief. After everything he had done, she was forgiving him, just like that. Thank you, he whispered. It was the most sincere thing he had said in years. The restaurant erupted in applause again. People were cheering for Alina, but they were also cheering for something else. They were cheering for redemption, for the possibility that people could change, for the hope that even the hardest hearts could soften. Alina smiled for the first time all night. A real smile. Not the fake one she wore for customers, but a genuine smile that lit up her whole face. She did not know it yet, but this was just the beginning. Richard Harrington was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. After the confrontation, Richard returned to his table with his investors, but the mood was completely different now. There was no more bragging about money, no more cruel jokes. The men spoke quietly, and several of them kept glancing at Alina with respect in their eyes. Alina tried to continue her work, but the other servers would not let her. They gathered around her, hugging her, asking her why she had never told them. Maria was crying again, saying over and over that she had always known Alina was special. The manager came over and told Alina to take the rest of the night off. He also told her that the $200 would be returned to her paycheck. He apologized for letting Richard bully her. Alina thanked him and said she understood. He had been scared of losing his job too. Everyone was scared of something. Before Richard left the restaurant that night, he did something unusual. He walked over to Alina and handed her a check. It was for $10,000, just as he had promised. You earned this, he said. Every penny. Alina looked at the check in her hands. She had never held this much money before. It felt unreal, like holding a dream. But Richard was not finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He pressed it into Alina's hand. Call me tomorrow morning, he said. I want to talk to you about something. It is not a trick. I give you my word. Alina looked at the card. It had Richard's name and phone number on it. She looked back up at him with suspicion. Why should she trust him? After everything he had done, Richard seemed to understand her doubt. I know I have not given you any reason to trust me, he said. But please, just call. I think I might be able to help you. He paused and added quietly. I think maybe you can help me too. Then he turned and walked out of the restaurant with his investors. His limousine was waiting outside. As he climbed in, he looked back at the restaurant one more time. Then the car drove away into the night. Alina went home that evening with her mind spinning. She kept looking at the check and the business card. $10,000. It was enough to pay for her mother's medicine for almost a year. It was enough to help Marco with college. It was more money than she had ever had at one time. But what did Richard want to talk about? What did he mean when he said he could help her? And what did he mean when he said she could help him? She did not sleep well that night. Her mind kept replaying everything that had happened. The humiliation, the challenge, the music, the applause, Richard's apology. It all felt like a movie, not real life. The next morning, Alina woke up early. She made breakfast for her mother and helped her with her medicine. Rosa could see that something was different about her daughter. Alina told her everything that had happened. When she finished, Rosa was crying. You played again, Rosa whispered. My baby played again. Alina hugged her mother tightly. Yes, Mama, she said. I played again. Rosa held up the check and looked at it in disbelief. $10,000, she said. Alina, this is a miracle, but Alina was still thinking about the business card. She was not sure if she should call. Part of her wanted to forget about Richard Harrington completely. He had humiliated her in front of everyone. Why should she give him another chance to hurt her? But another part of her was curious. Something had changed in Richard last night. She had seen it in his eyes. The cruel mask had fallen away, and underneath was just a lonely, broken man. Maybe he really did want to help. Maybe people really could change. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Alina picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. Richard answered on the second ring. His voice sounded different on the phone. Softer, more human. Thank you for calling, he said. I was not sure you would. I almost did not, Alina admitted. Richard laughed, but it was not the cruel laugh from the restaurant. It was a real laugh, with warmth in it. I do not blame you, he said. I was terrible to you. They talked for a few minutes about the night before. Richard apologized again. Alina accepted again. Then Richard got to the point. I have a sister, he explained. Her name is Catherine. She is nothing like me. She is kind and generous and actually cares about people. She runs a foundation that helps young artists who cannot afford to pursue their dreams. Alina listened carefully. She did not know where this was going. Last night, after I left the restaurant, I called Catherine. Richard continued. I told her everything. I told her about you, about your talent, about how you gave up Juilliard to take care of your family. He paused. She wants to meet you. Elena's heart started beating faster. Meet me? Why? Richard took a deep breath. Because she wants to offer you a scholarship, he said. A full scholarship to complete your studies at any music school you choose. Plus a living stipend so you do not have to work while you study. Plus complete medical coverage for your mother. Alina almost dropped the phone. She must have heard wrong. This could not be real. But, she whispered. I know it sounds too good to be true, Richard said. But I promise you, this is real. Catherine's foundation has helped dozens of young artists over the years. Musicians, painters, dancers, people who had talent but not money. She believes that talent should not be wasted just because someone was born poor. Alina sat down on her bed. Her legs could not hold her anymore. This was too much. After everything she had been through, after all the years of struggle and sacrifice, someone was offering to give her back her dream. Why? She asked. Why would you do this for me? You do not owe me anything. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then Richard spoke, and his voice was thick with emotion. No, he said. I do not owe you anything, but I owe myself the chance to finally do something that matters. He explained that he had spent his whole life taking from people, taking their money, their buildings, their pride. He had never given anything back. He had never used his wealth to help anyone except himself. But last night, something changed. He said, when I heard you play, when I saw what you had sacrificed, when I realized how wrong I had been about everything. He paused. I want to be different. I need to be different. Helping you is not charity. It is my first step toward becoming a better person. Alina was crying now. Tears were running down her cheeks and dropping onto the business card in her hand. She could not believe this was happening. After all the darkness, here was light. I do not know what to say. She managed to whisper. Say you will think about it, Richard said. Say you will meet with Catherine and hear what she has to offer. That is all I ask. Alina wiped her eyes. She looked around her small apartment. She looked at the closet where her old keyboard was hidden. She thought about all the dreams she had buried and all the years she had lost. Then she thought about her mother, who had believed in her from the very beginning. She thought about Marco, who deserved a chance at a better life. She thought about the little girl who used to sit at the piano and make magic with her fingers. Yes, Alina said finally. I will meet with her. She could hear Richard smile through the phone. Good, he said. This is going to change your life, Alina. I promise you that. He was right. It would change everything. But not just for Alina, for Richard too, and for everyone who would hear her music in the years to come. 1 year later, on a cold winter evening, Lincoln Center in New York City was filled with people. The concert hall held over 2,000 seats, and every single one was taken. People had come from all over the world to hear the performance. Critics, musicians, music lovers, and curious strangers all sat together, waiting for the show to begin. The program said only one name. Elena Busquets. In the front row sat Rosa Vasquez. She was still in a wheelchair, but her health had improved greatly over the past year. She now had the best doctors in New York taking care of her. She had access to medicine she never could have afforded before. Her daughter had made sure of that. Next to Rosa sat Marco. He was 20 years old now and in his first year at Columbia University. He was studying engineering, just like he had always dreamed. He no longer worked at the gas station. He no longer worried about money. His sister had changed everything. 3 seats away from Marco sat Richard Harrington. 3. He looked different than he had a year ago. His hair was a little grayer, but his eyes were brighter. The cruel hardness was gone from his face. He smiled more now. He laughed more. He had learned how to be human again. Richard had kept his promise. He had introduced Elena to his sister Catherine, and Catherine had fallen in love with Elena's story immediately. The scholarship was arranged within weeks. Alina was given everything she needed to return to her studies. She chose to complete her degree at Juilliard, the school she had given up so many years ago, but Richard did not stop there. Over the past year, he had quietly paid off all of Elena's family debts. He had set up a trust fund to make sure Rosa would always have medical care. He had funded Marco's entire college education. He did all of this without asking for anything in return. When Alina found out about these extra gifts, she had confronted Richard. She told him it was too much. She told him she could not accept so much help. Richard had simply smiled and said, "Let me do this, please. It makes me feel like my life has meaning." And Alina understood. Richard was not buying her forgiveness or her friendship. He was buying his own redemption. Every dollar he spent on her family was a dollar spent on becoming a better man. The two of them had become friends over the past year. Not close friends, but real friends. They had dinner together sometimes. They talked about music and life and the strange ways fate works. Richard told her about his childhood and his mother and how he had lost his way. Alina told him about her dreams and her fears, and how hard it had been to give up the piano. They helped each other heal. Richard had also started a new foundation. He called it Second Chances. It was designed to help talented people who had been forced to give up their dreams because of difficult circumstances. Musicians, artists, writers, scientists, anyone with a gift and a story. Richard hired people to find them, to evaluate them, to give them the support they needed. In the first year alone, the foundation helped over 50 people. Some went back to school. Some started their own businesses. Some simply got the chance to try again. Richard spent millions of dollars on the program, and he said it was the best money he had ever spent. His children had noticed the change in their father. They had started visiting more often. His son had called him on his birthday and they had talked for 2 hours. His daughter had invited him to her wedding next spring. Richard cried when he got that invitation. He cried because he had thought it was too late. He had thought he had lost his family forever. But it turned out that people can forgive if you show them you have changed. Now, sitting in Lincoln Center, Richard waited for Elena's performance to begin. He felt nervous for her. He wanted her to succeed. He wanted the world to see what he had seen that night in the restaurant. The lights in the concert hall dimmed. The crowd went silent. A single spotlight illuminated the grand piano on the stage. And then Elena walked out. She was wearing a beautiful red dress that flowed behind her as she moved. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. She walked with confidence, with grace, with the quiet power of someone who knows exactly who she is. The audience applauded as she approached the piano. Elena smiled and bowed slightly. Then she sat down at the bench and adjusted her position. She closed her eyes for a moment, just like she had done in the restaurant 1 year ago when she opened her eyes. She looked directly at her mother in the front row. Rosa was crying already. She always cried when Elena played, but these were happy tears, proud tears, the tears of a mother who had watched her daughter fall and then rise again. Elena placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play. She played for 2 hours that night. She played Chopin and Rachmaninoff and Beethoven and Liszt. She played pieces that made people laugh and pieces that made them cry. She played with all the skill she had developed over years of practice and all the emotion she had built up over years of struggle. When she finished, the audience rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous. It went on and on, wave after wave of appreciation and love. Critics would later call it one of the most remarkable debut performances in a generation. They would write that Elena Vasquez played like she had lived 1,000 lives. And in a way, she had. After the final bow, Elena walked to the front of the stage. She held up her hand, and the applause slowly quieted. She had something to say. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began. Her voice was clear and strong. "But I also want to share something with you. A year ago, I was a waitress. I served food to people who never looked at me. I had given up on my dreams because life had been hard." The audience listened in complete silence one night. A man came into the restaurant where I worked. He was rich and powerful and very cruel. He mocked me. He humiliated me. He challenged me to play the piano, expecting me to fail. Elena paused and looked at Richard, but instead, I played, and that night changed everything. She smiled at Richard. He smiled back with tears in his eyes. "That man is here tonight," Elena continued. "His name is Richard Harrington, and I want everyone to know that he is not the same person he was a year ago. He apologized to me. He helped me. He gave me a second chance." She paused. "People can change. Even the hardest hearts can soften. I have seen it." The audience looked at Richard. Some of them recognized him from the newspapers. They knew his reputation, but they also saw the man sitting in the front row with tears on his cheeks. They saw someone who had been transformed. "I want to leave you with one thought," Elena said. "Our circumstances do not define us. Our choices do. I chose to sit down at that piano even though I was scared. Richard chose to apologize even though it was hard. We all have the power to choose who we want to be." She looked out at the sea of faces. "Never give up on your dreams," she said. "And never give up on people. You never know what someone is capable of until you give them a chance." Then she bowed one final time and walked off the stage. The applause followed her into the wings. It followed her down the hallway. It seemed to follow her everywhere she went that night. After the concert, there was a small reception. Alina hugged her mother for a long time. She hugged Marco and told him how proud she was of him. She hugged Maria and the other servers from the Golden Terrace, who had all come to see her perform, and she hugged Richard. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear, "for everything." Richard hugged her back. "No," he said. "Thank you. You saved my life." Alina pulled back and looked at him. She saw the man who had once tormented her, but she also saw the man he had become, a man who was learning to be kind, a man who was using his wealth to help others, a man who had finally found something more important than money. "We saved each other," she said. Richard nodded. He could not speak. There were no words for what he was feeling. Outside the concert hall, the winter night was cold and clear. Stars sparkled in the dark sky. Alina stood at the top of the steps with her family, looking out at the city that had once seemed so hard and unforgiving. But tonight, the city looked different. It looked full of possibilities, full of second chances, full of people who were just waiting for someone to believe in them. Alina took her mother's hand on one side and her brother's hand on the other. She took a deep breath of the cold night air. She had come so far from that tired waitress who was afraid to touch the piano. She had traveled through humiliation and fear and doubt. She had played her way back to herself, and now, standing in the glow of Lincoln Center with the people she loved, Alina Vasquez knew that her journey was just beginning. There would be more concerts, more triumphs, more challenges, but she was ready for all of it, because she had learned the most important lesson of all. No matter how hard life gets, no matter how impossible things seem, there is always hope. There is always a chance to start again. There is always music waiting to be played. All you have to do is sit down at the piano and begin.